So it's really important to know how to position yourself and move around on the stage. When discussing where to stand or move on the stage, often the term blocking is used, which is a theater term that actors use. The idea is that positioning on the stage and movement is planned rather than random. The rule of thumb is to never move without a reason. Now, the skill of stage positioning and presence is one that develops over time. It can be hard enough to remember what to talk about without being mindful of your every move. So just keep in mind this takes practice. But pre-planned movements during your presentation helps you practice for proper stage presence, and it does become more natural over time. Now, the reason why your movement on the stage is important is because movement attracts the audience's attention, and you will distract them if you're moving around constantly or aimlessly. And this is why you don't want to just pace around the stage randomly. And you'll also bore them if you just plant yourself stiff like a tree in one spot or hide behind the podium. Movement enhances your presentation, and it also burns up nervous energy, so that could be a bonus. And plus, movement can increase your confidence. So I'm going to talk about some beginner positioning techniques. First is to have power positions. So you always want to have one spot that's a home position or a power position, and then 2 additional locations on either side. And these are going to be your go-to standing places so that you don't have to think about it. And by planning to move from one spot to another throughout your presentation, you ensure that you're not favoring one side of the audience over the other on accident. Now, usually the power position would be front and center. And this is where you would stand when you're delivering the most important key messages of your presentation. And you can also use it as where you go anytime you get disoriented and you need to just return home to get back on track. Now, the other 2 spots on either side should be a little bit spread out. And so one of the things to keep in mind when you are moving about the stage is to step and plant. So what that means is you're going to take several steps, often at a slight angle, and then you're going to stop and you're going to deliver more of the information. And so I like to think of it like step, 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 plant. And so it gives you a way of moving without being distracting and just pacing back and forth. Now, just a note here, if you are given the opportunity to use a podium, keep in mind that using a podium and just standing there is much less engaging. If you do use one, we highly recommend not just standing behind it at the same time. The only time that it can actually be effective is if you're delivering a short keynote speech. But even then, if you don't need to use one, it's probably better not to. Also, this program is designed primarily to train facilitators, and by the very nature of facilitating, one would not want to stand behind a podium. So next I'm going to talk about body movement and communication. So planning gestures for important points of your presentation is a powerful way of adding depth to what you're talking about. Now, we're going to talk more about communicating with body language in another video. You also want to use body language in a way that minimizes the distractions, because you might have mannerisms or things that you're fidgeting with that also can be a trigger or a distraction for your audience. So if you have to hold something like a marker or a remote control, keep in mind you're going to have to practice not fidgeting with it. Or you can fidget with it, just use it intentionally to cause distraction on purpose or for emphasis, but just don't allow yourself to use it as a bad habit. And again, we're going to get more into that in another video. Another thing you do have to be mindful of is good posture. You want to keep your head up, you want to make eye contact, and you want to look physically in a state that you are confident. And so one way that you can use your body to make a point is to step forward. So if you're arriving in an important point in your message, if you step forward, it provides emphasis. Now, at the same time, if you step back, it can indicate that you're concluding an idea or that you want the audience to relax. So the more forward motion, the more high intensity, and backward motion is lower intensity. And then you can also use moving side to side or moving to and from those different places that I mentioned as a way of illustrating that you're moving on to a new topic. So it gives them a visual cue that the content of what you're talking about is changing. And so if you're going to be using visual aids, you have to be mindful not to stand in front of or block your projector light or your slides or anything else on the stage that you need people to be looking at. Another thing to keep in mind is turning your back to the audience. So if you're going to look at slides on a screen, try to do so by turning halfway, not all the way around. Glance at them really quickly and then turn back. And if you're going to be writing on a whiteboard or a flip chart, if you're not using a microphone, you don't want to talk to the audience while your back is turned writing because they won't be able to hear you. It's not as relevant if you are wearing a lapel mic, but you do want to keep in mind to turn back around as quickly as possible. And this is also why flip charts are often at an angle on the stage so that you're able to write on them without turning your back. If you're using a slide presentation, then moving back towards the screen will draw your audience's attention to the slide. While if you want to have them look at you instead of the slide, you can step forward to draw your attention back onto you. Now, we do have an entire video talking about using PowerPoint or other slide presentations in your event. So now I'm going to go over several advanced positioning techniques. And these are a few fun ways that you can use those 3 positions that I was talking about. The first is to develop a timeline. So for instance, if you're telling a story that takes place over a period of time, you can move from one side of the stage representing the past to the center of the stage representing the present and to the other side representing the future. You can use a similar technique to illustrate different perspectives. For instance, if you're arguing the pros and cons of a topic, you can stand on one side to discuss the pros, while the other side to discuss the cons. And alternatively, you could represent one side being one extreme, the other side being the other, and then the middle being neutral. You can also use these positions to anchor a certain emotion. If every time you tell a story that will trigger a powerful emotion, you tell the story from the exact same position on the stage, then you train the audience to associate that feeling with a certain area on the stage. And then when you're presenting and you walk towards that area, unconsciously, the audience anticipates that another emotional story is coming, and physiologically and in their brain, they actually prepare for it. So I hope you can see that where you stand and how you move on stage is much more important than just being on stage. It does matter. And once you get used to it, you can use your motion across the stage as a way of engaging with your audience without them even realizing that you're doing it. Now, of course, if you're just getting started, you want to start simple and you want to have some pre-planned locations to make it easier for yourself. And then as you get more comfortable, feel free to move around and make some plans for how you can add depth to your presentation by using different positions on your stage.